And I believe it's live, and hopefully all now good. I'm just going to check the public view, make sure, yeah, that seems to be there. So, which camera? I'm on this camera. Let's get muddled. So, welcome to an Ask a Dungeon Mistress live chat with me. Hi. So, today I shall be... no, I think I'll leave that done up because I've just realised this is a white top with black underwear, so that'll stay done up. Right, so this is a live chat. That means you can ask questions in the chat. So I'm going to put this up, and there's Ronnie saying, welcome back. Indeed, this is the second attempt at doing this stream, that camera. Because we did an experiment. I tried to get it working on 1080p. I'm just taking off my shoes, and not quite up to it with the hardware we've currently got, so we will invest at some point. So I'm just going to fix a little visual glitch I just saw there. Right, that's sorted. Okay, good. So, hopefully now the video quality should be good. So, usually when I do these things, I start with a topic, something I kind of chat about just to get things going, and there is something suddenly went off again. What do you mean I suddenly went off again? Suddenly, what? What is this? Is this technical problems plaguing the stream? Primary stream. Please check the video resolution. Okay, I have made an error. I am actually streaming at 720, but at 1080. Wonder if I can even change that during a stream. It's probably balls. How's the quality? Because apparently I'm still streaming at 1080, but I've told YouTube to expect 720. How's the technical? There's so many things you have to click. And I did it wrong. Whoops. So, whilst I wait for somebody on stream, Ronnie, if you're still there, let's do graphics. So hopefully we're not dropping frames or anything like that, with a bit of luck. We might have just fluked to 1080p stream, I don't know. What's it looking like at your end? Let me know. So today's topic, assuming the video quality is good enough to continue broadcasting, I might have to try a third time. You are back. So let me know what the quality is like on this stream, because I've made an error on the setup and it's too late to change it. It won't let me. Yeah, I might be dropping the odd frame. I'm still apparently broadcasting in 1080p, but telling YouTube to expect 720. Technical issue. There's just so many things you have to check off when you get live. In some ways, doing a live video is so much easier than doing a pre-recorded one, because like you do a pre-recorded, you set up multiple shots, you're moving the camera, you're doing all these different kind of things. Thank you, Ronnie. And then you go off into editing, and the fastest you can ever edit anything is 3 times as much footage as you shot, right? That's the quickest. It's probably going to take longer. Then you hit render, and well, my computer, you come back the next day. There's just so much you have to do, like work-wise. Live is actually easy. You just sit there and talk to a camera. There's no editing. It's the cheapest content you can probably produce, but getting the technical stuff set up, it's a pain, a real pain. And you make one little error and it's too late, you're live. Thank you for letting me know. So today's topic I want to talk about elf cities, dwarf cities, human cities, dragonborn cities. It's something I'm sure I must have mentioned this before at some point on some chat thing, because it's something I've been mindful of for a while, But I just kind of want us to sort of dig deeper into it. This whole concept that a city is full of a race, and like usually in an RPG, if we do a human city, quite often we'll have like a dwarf quarter or a halfling quarter or something along those lines. We will accept that in a human city there might be a section of the city that is kind of like a ghetto for some other race. And then we go off to an elf city and it's all elves. Tolkien did the same. Rivendell was the city of the elves, but at the same time, in the same book, he had hobbits who went to live with the elves. But it was live with the elves like this was an exception to the rule. And you look at real cities and it's never been that way. You go right back to Viking times, which is, or Roman times, I suppose, the sort of beginning, lots of documentation of it, and you've got all sorts of people in every city. The Vikings, as I mentioned, they would travel around the world, and in D&D, particularly Forgotten Realms, religion is tied to races, where the reality is religion is geographical. Religion is not inherent knowledge. It's stories that are passed on from one generation to the next, and consequently they cluster in an area. The Western world, for example, is mostly Christian. You go to the Middle East and it's mostly Islam. Now there are various factions within both of those religions. You've got the Protestants, the Catholics, the Baptists, the Jehovah's. You've got all these different sects, but religion is geographical. So we're kind of doing it the wrong way round. People migrate, religions sort of don't, or they do it much slower. So that really is something I wanted to just kind of get off my chest again. And I was thinking about this recently. So a message from Ronnie. Let's get it up on screen. So I certainly agree that cities would be multicultural, although I do like the odd race-only city, as they tend to stick out, so the story behind that can be a hook for the characters. Well, I've done it myself. Like I've had a dwarven city in my I did this campaign called the Brawlers campaign, which is pretty much where I played D&D 5th edition for the first time. It ran for a year. I was with a real life group. We met up every month and we kind of zoomed through all the levels just to kind of experience the full gamut of D&D in one campaign. And so I had this city that was very much a dwarven city, and it was built inside a statue of a dwarf, of a famous dwarf. And it just felt isolated. Like this city obviously didn't trade at all with anyone, so there was no economic migration. Most migration is economic in the real world. And I'm not saying that every RPG should be gritty and real. We play these games to get away from reality, but I've always said, if you observe something in the real world, then bring it into your games, because it will enhance them. It will give them more colour, and it'll give them more depth to them. So I like to use things from the real world. And I suppose it's certainly true even today. You can go to a country and walk around and feel like you're the only tourist there. But at the same time, as a thought for religion as a topic, how would you handle atheism in a setting where gods are seen as a given? Well, that's always been something that's kind of problematical in D&D, in that your gods are real, but of course you've got so many gods that I think essentially every character is basically atheist, because there's no agreement. There's definitely, like, there is no... Is there a creator god in D&D? I don't think... Maybe some of the pantheons do have a creator god, but I think in a lot of the larger D&D pantheons, there's hierarchies of gods. To be honest, I find it very confusing. Like, even with Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which is a fucking bible for religion in D&D and Forgotten Realms, because it is just non-stop religion from start to finish. The entire book is all about gods, and they have in one pantheon multiple religions for multiple gods of war under the same alignments. You know, there's like 3 lawful goods, 4 lawful evils, 5 lawful neutrals. I ranted about this before on the last live chat, I think. And any other time Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide gets referenced. I'm just going to adjust this camera angle slightly. Maybe if I move it like that, and I can be kind of on screen. There we go. So I think essentially every character is fundamentally atheist in that they all know there's no absolute belief in a god and therefore other religions are wrong, because don't forget, part of religion is denying other religions, and in D&D you kind of accept, well, my god's real but so's yours, so you're not really, it's not about belief in gods, it's about, in D&D, religious characters don't believe in gods, they know that gods are real. The belief's not a question, it's about observing tenets. And I think most D&D characters and most NPCs don't observe tenets of the various D&D gods, mostly because as much as has been written about the gods in the worlds of D&D, they've never written down the tenets, which is like one of my biggest problems with religion in D&D, is it's essentially, well, if it's a lawful good god, it's the Christian ideals, and if it's any other, they do it by alignment, and those alignments are very closely tied to Christian ideology, and that is not doing religions right at all. Religions have weird rules and things, like Catholics have confession and little quirks that give them their character, and that's where the real character of a religion comes from. And if you want to put a religion into your world setting, you really need to have some quirks to that religion. Jehovah's will knock your door and have a reputation based off of that, because they do literally go out door knocking. It's always in pairs, so if a member of the public gets them tongue-tied, the other one will then come in and then reassert the party line, all that kind of thing. And that's missing in D&D. It just, even Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, the closest it gets to giving a religion a quirk is they say, under these circumstances, somebody might call out, a curse or reference this particular god. They make a mistake whilst whittling wood, they might reference this god, or that god. That's as close as it gets to giving any kind of religion a quirk. And as a GM, you're reading this, you're going, I've got to remember all of this to make the religions believable. It's not possible. But yeah, I mean, I'll tell you where I was coming from there when I was thinking about this topic. I was thinking about the civil rights. The concept definitely floats my boat. But I don't know if I'd ever implement it or run a campaign in that setting. I use ideas, like whenever I read a D&D module or source book or world setting, I take the bits I like and I put that into my own stuff. I did a not very good video once. Sorry, not everything I do is brilliant apparently. But I did this video on how to play D&D like an adult. It was meant to be a kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of joke at my own expense. It didn't really come across right. But anyway, the point of that video was that modules are great, but buy modules, read modules, but don't run them. Just mine them for ideas and take the good bits, because the problem with modules is you end up too much in this linear railroad setting, because you're taking a book that they can't write every situation. There's no book that can prepare you for the players I play with. It's not possible. They will go off on their own path, and as a GM, I see my job as to facilitate that path. Not to say, well, that's outside of the book, I'm sorry, you've got to do it one of these 3 ways. Because I don't think that's right as a GM. At that point, you're not being a GM, you're being somebody who's reading a book. But having said that, sometimes there are some really great ideas in modules that I will just go, you know what, that's fantastic, I want to use that. And for me, that's what I would like to read Spelljammer to get more ideas for that whole idea, because I love the idea of doing D&D between planets. And I mentioned the Brawlers campaign earlier. I started a new campaign with my real life group last weekend, and they wanted to do a sequel to that campaign. It isn't really what I wanted to do, but you have to get buy-in, and everyone needs to be on board when you run a campaign. Like when I do a session 0, my approach to that isn't about saying this is the game I want to play and I've got this idea for a world setting, let me explain it to you. I like to get buy-in from my players, so they've all got to be up for it. So the first question is, what kind of tone do we want? And they said we want to do heroic. So as soon as you say heroic, well, you say, well, 5th edition work for you then, because D&D is suitable for doing an heroic style game. You know, your players can be on as much of a power trip as they like. D&D fits that. If they've gone for gritty, then I would have maybe put forward a homebrew or something else. So that for me is what Session 0 is about. And then they said, well, we'd quite like to, do a sequel to the Brawlers campaign. So I'm like, great, let's set it a few years after you screwed the planet up. Because they did. The end of the Brawlers campaign, the planet they were on became the 10th level of Hell. And the way I did the levels of Hell in this setting was Hell, or Asmodeus, was a gas giant. The River Styx was the rings around the planet. And each level of Hell was a moon that was in those rings. So, to travel the River Styx, you'd get on the ferryman, and the ferryman don't move, it's the rotation of the planets, and then you'd hop off again. And I had interplanetary travel, or travel between moons in the original campaign. Sometimes it was on the back of an eagle, sometimes on a dragon, sometimes they were teleported through space. I think they may have even done it once on a flying carpet. Because I love that idea of, right, that we want to go to a level of the 5th level of Hell. Let's do it. Let's chuck them on the back of a dragon and fly there. Fantastic. It's just epic. And that really was what that campaign was about. It was very, very epic, and they wanted more. So that's what I'm running at the moment. I kind of went off on a tangent. I'll see what the other questions are. My fave settings in RPGs aren't D&D settings. In terms of fantasy, it would be Aldis in Blue Rose and New Europa in Castle Falkenstein. I don't know those settings. I know those systems. I've played. I haven't played Castle Falkenstein. I have played Blue Rose. I don't know Aldis. Is that because I did play Blue Rose with you, Ronnie? Was that in Aldis? I'm not sure. Red Baron says, I'm still a novice, so all I know are Forgotten Realms, Planescape and Eberron. My favourite might be Eberron. I can understand why, but I don't like Eberron, and the reason is, although it's got ships that sail through the air, fantastic, love a bit of epic. My big problem with Eberron is the droids. Sorry, Warforged. They're droids. And they don't fit for me. I'm quite happy to have a steam-powered golem as a monster that players have to fight, or as a feature in the world, but player character droids? Nah, for me it doesn't work. I don't like them, and I think the moment that and if you're going to play Eberron, somebody's going to take that down Warforged, and it's like, okay, great, now your healer can't heal, and all these new mechanics in the party just to handle the fact that you got a robot and you're a robot. So really, if you're role playing that properly, you're going to be, well, if I'm going to have a robot, golem, whatever, in an adventure, I quite like Terry Pratchett's take on it, where you write the words on a scroll, you put that in the robot, and then that's what that robot does. That golem does that thing. I love that take on it, and I would rather have that in the world than somebody playing R2D2. And that's really, for me, it's a deal breaker with Eberron. But flying ships, cool. Video is going through some buffering glitches. Oh, so sorry, guys. I hope it's watchable. I can stop the stream and start it again. Let me know how bad it is. I'm not too worried if it's got the odd glitch, but let me know if it's so bad that it makes you maybe think, okay, no, we need to sort this, because, like I said, I did get a setting wrong, and I can't change it now on broadcasting, but I can always remake the stream. So, yeah, we players love taking the road less travelled, or the road... yeah, that's in reference to take the ideas from modules, not run the modules themselves. Speaking of session zeros, do you make campaigns after you hear what sort of PCs your players want to make, or vice versa? No, absolutely after. Like, when I started my session zero, my new campaign last weekend, I didn't even know what tone the game would be. Until it was the first question I asked in the session zero, what kind of thing did we want to play? The only thing I did know was that because it was an all-weekend game, we started on the Saturday, we finished on the Sunday. We had sleep in between. But we generally do our campaign kickoffs at what we call the birthday event, which is this 2-day RP or gaming session. And when I do real life sessions, I tend to do a big, impressive miniature setup, and I always try to do something new for the players to really sort of wow them over as they come in and they see this amazing setup. So in the last video I did, gosh, what was it called? They had the castle with the city walls and the city half turned to rock. I can't remember the name of the video. Counter Ideas Sieges, that was it. And it was an amazing setup. I filmed an episode for the channel using that setup, and then because the game was in a few days' time, I left that setup out, and that's the one we gamed on. So I knew that the campaign would start with the siege, and it was a fantasy game, and that was really all I kind of said beforehand, and that was purely because I can't make scenery if I don't even know what genre we're doing. So I put this new scenery out, and we were going to use that. But that's a practicality of the fact that I always like to do these big, impressive new setups for a real life game, and for a bigger 2-day event, I wanted something special. Hence, I built the keep with the outer walls and the inner walls and stuff. So it was pretty cool. But if I wasn't doing a miniature setup, I wouldn't even have brought that to a session zero. Ideally, I'd like to say, what kind of game do we want? Okay, we up for fantasy, we up for sci-fi, what do we fancy this time? And that would be a question I would ask in session zero. It's only because of doing the miniature build and the weeks of painting beforehand that I even brought that to the table as we've got to do this setup. So yeah, that for me is definitely for me, I want my players to be invested in the campaign. I don't want to start a campaign and have everyone drop out, or what usually happens is players don't drop out, they say, how about we do this thing, and then they bring out what they really want to play. You may as well talk to them and find out what they really want to play and then play that. That's the way I look at it. And if my idea doesn't gain enough traction, I've got this fantastic idea for something and it doesn't gain enough traction, then I absolutely need to sell it better to them. But if that means it has to wait until next time we start a campaign and we're on the next session zero, and then I do a better job, if it's such a great idea, it will come through. So that's the approach I take on it. The only problem though with having your session zero and having that kind of setup out, the big problem I had was I couldn't plan an adventure, so I didn't have enough planned beforehand. So I was running very ad hoc. Now I'm quite happy to run completely ad hoc, but it does create a game without as much depth, because you haven't had the chance to think about it, plan, and decide what's going to come in when. And when you're GMing, you're busy GMing, so you don't... I don't find I've got enough mental capacity to put real depth and layers and stuff in. So you're going straight from session zero into session one with no break in between. and you didn't even know what system you were going to run, that does create a kind of shallower game. But if your players are okay with that, I would rather have that shallower session 1, that sort of start to the game, little light intro, nothing too in-depth. I would rather have that and have buy-in from the players. Now, if your group meets weekly, you could do a session 0 and then do your session 1 next time you meet, and then it's not a problem. You've had a chance to prepare, right? But if that's a new group of players who never played before, I always like to give them a taste of the game. I don't just want a session 0 and then say, right, we'll come back next week and we'll actually play it. You've got to actually play the game on your first time trying to play it. You can't just do a load of book referencing and stuff. And it's like, what's that? It's their first experience of D&D. Give them a taste. Anyway, next question. Okay, so I have experienced Aldis. It seemed quite interesting. That as a setting. I didn't read the books, so I don't know what was so different about it as to any homebrew system, but certainly the game I played in that setting with you, Ronnie, was an enjoyable game. And had several memes come out of it. Session 0 for me is half and half read. I have an idea for a game, but the characters that the players create will tweak how the spine of the campaign may change. And I think that's true of most GMs. Like, most GMs know what they want to run, and then they'll take ideas from character creation and include that. I think I do it a step further, where I don't even choose the system that we're going to run now, because I want my players to want to play the same game that I'm running. That really is it. So it's a different approach, and as I say, it does have that weakness for me. Like, our weekend games are like 8-hour plus sessions, so you're not going to do 8 hours of session 0. It's going to be because we meet monthly at best. So there's downsides, but yeah. Okay, let's see if we've got more in there. Oh, come on, next question. I'm new to DMing, so I feel that I have a loose and open start to the campaign allows me to explore how the PCs operate and let them get attached organically. Yeah, I mean, the terminology of loose and open, I think, can mean different things, and because like open, is that referring to railroading or you can go anywhere? Because you can go anywhere is absolutely fine, but there can also be issues with it. Like I remember a GM once, the start of the campaign, it was a traveller campaign if I remember rightly, and we were in orbit and we had to choose which planet we were going to, and apparently this choice of planet would have massive ramifications on the campaign, but we didn't really have any information about the planets. We just said just the planet that's there and the planet that's there, and we didn't know anything about them, so this choice was arbitrary. He could have even swapped the planets around, made up in his own mind. I think one was desert, one was thing, but we didn't have the sensors to even read that, so it was arbitrary to us. And it's like if you're in a dungeon, the choice of left or right is arbitrary. Now, if you say the choice to the left, the passage air smells fresher, on the right it's more stale, maybe there's some acrid undertones and you can feel a breeze. Now I've got some information and I can start making informed choices, and then based on, I can cross-reference this new information with other stuff I know about the environment I'm in, and I make an informed choice. So that's no longer arbitrary. So there is that difficulty, if you haven't had the chance to prep, of not being really able to give meaningful choices to players, because it is hard to give that much detail on the fly. You're not that many steps ahead of the players, and you can foreshadow something and then bring it up 3 scenes later, but it doesn't have the same kind of depth as something that's prepared. But you quite rightly say, if you over prepare, you could be on a railroad. and that's wrong. So there are ways of preparing and techniques which can help you, so let's say you've got, let's call it a clue you want your players to discover. Doesn't matter what the clue is, just a MacGuffin, doesn't matter. The point is, there's this clue, and a lot of GMs will say this clue can be found here, and if they go there, they can find that. But what you've then done is you've tied that clue to a place, potentially a time, if it's depending on the nature of the clue. So that then means they can only discover that thing by going there. That kind of prep will set you up for railroad. But if you say, here's this clue that they could discover, and here's a deep dive, ultra detailed thing that they could get, like an extension to that clue, so you have this clue light and clue detailed. So now they've got a clue, and they might learn a lot about it, or they might learn a little, but don't decide where that clue is discovered. Now you've got something you can drop in whatever the players do. That's the kind of difference in prep. It's just a difference in approach. And I know Jason's going to talk a lot more about this stuff in a future video, but because it's a technique he uses a lot. That kind of approach to prep will enable you to run a more open game, but also give it the same kind of depth that a more railroaded campaign can have. Okay, Ronnie says, fantasy game I'm running at the moment is in that difficult period now. I'm running a high-level campaign where the players are all that can protect their world from the darkness, so no pressure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what system you're running that. I'm guessing because it's you, Ronnie, it's not going to be D&D. I know D&D, I hate it at high level. But I always love high stakes. I love to have Armageddons. Like, if you're doing an epic, heroic game, then the world has to be at stake. The question is, how many Armageddons are going on at once? Because I remember my Brawlers 1 campaign, I had 4 concurrent Armageddons, and they all kept moving whatever the players were doing. They didn't wait for the players. So I think that's why they want a sequel, because it was just everything turned up to 11. But yeah, high-level D&D, really, I have so many complaints about that. It just doesn't work as a system. I think the game, like the absolute highest I like to play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is about 12th level. And if you go back to the older editions, I think its sweet spot is sort of between 5th and 8th. That's where it's good. So I started the Brawlers 2 campaign at 4th, because I think I wanted them to feel heroic, so start them up a little higher, that's fine. But I'm going to level them slowly, because I want the end of the campaign, I want them no higher than 12, ideally a little less. So, Red Baron says, what I mean is sticking some simple quests on a quest board, give them a clear objective, and let them choose how to accomplish it. In the long term, the decisions don't mean a great deal. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's anything wrong with that. And I've always, ever since I started role-playing games longer ago than I care to admit, I've always kind of had this notion of an adventurers guild, but I've never actually put one into a game ever. Like this adventurers guild you go to, and there's like a notice of all the things you can do, and you've got to pay a guild fee and all this kind of stuff. I've never actually used it. I've always wanted to. Maybe this campaign. Ronnie says, certainly in terms of information, I tend to ensure that there are multiple possible ways of finding the information out depending on its obscurity. You know, some stuff comes from the scene and what the players do. The player does something and you go, it's logical to put something in. And that's absolutely fine. That stuff you can do off the hoof and it's always fine. But then the main key story points, that's what I like to keep free of an obligation to a specific path or solution route. So, you know, I don't mind what role is used to discover the clue. It's not a question of if they roll perception, they can smell blood. It's this creature's blood is unusual. Yeah, that's the clue. And then how it's discovered in the game, whether it's a perception test on smell, or whether it's an investigation check, or whether it's a medicine check, or whether it's just going to a certain NPC who knows about blood, or whether it's because they see some blood and it's dissolving walls, doesn't matter. The important thing is the creature's blood is unusual. That's my clue. That's what I package up. And then the detailed version of that is some specific that ties into whatever the narrative is. Yeah, the fantasy game is the Shinta setting for Savage Worlds. Yeah, I remember you mentioning that now. So Red Baron says, this technique reminds me of the Alexandrian 3 clue method. Make sure the party finds the most important clue. Something I did learn from you is to be willing to move the clues around. Yeah, I'm not sure of the Alexandrian 3 clue method. I've not heard that term before. So, hello, Earmark Ordology LLC. Red Baron, if I need to... Okay, that was a continued post. And yeah, hi from all of us. Hi all around. Oh, and I accidentally went past Ronnie's thing there by clicking past the highs too quick. I'm sorry, Ronnie. I don't know what you said. I don't often see you live stream. It's good to see you. So, how to D&D? Hello. Welcome to me talk. Now, originally, I started this stream off intending to talk about the civil rights movement, and I haven't got to it yet. So, also hello from Sri Lanka. Ah, cool. Right, so I've answered all the things that were raised. Now I can go back to my original point about the civil rights movement, and I can't remember why I wanted to talk about this now. But, okay, so the genesis of the civil rights movement was in World War II in Britain, not in America. And this is the really interesting thing. Don't worry about it. I give you permission not to for the next hour and a half or so. So I'm going to do a bit of history now, because I think it's interesting, and it's interesting in the way we approach cities in D&D and the way we build our cities and our cultures that fit within them. You see, in the 40s, America was a segregated society. You had the Jim Crow laws, and you had serious issues with race, and in Britain, you didn't have that. Britain, I wouldn't say it was a bed of roses for black people, but the blatant racism of America wasn't there. Britain had a very different approach, British people had very different thoughts on race, because it was, we had this empire, and, you know, so we viewed these... We didn't have this idea of black people being inferior. It was more, we're superior, I think. And that was kind of the 40s mindset. You know, we're the ones with the empire. We kind of have a responsibility. And, you know, we are a great nation. And that was kind of the mindset, rather than the much more American idea of the black person being inferior. So and that was kind of the difference, really, in the 40s. Now, what happened in World War II is lots of Americans came to Britain to fight. Now, in America at the time, in World War II, the army was segregated, and there was, I think I'm right in saying that the attitude of the white American GI was very much that a black soldier is nothing more than a hod carrier, even though they're quite often fighting and dying. The units were segregated, and there was obviously all the racial tension got brought from America, put into a camp in the middle of Britain, and these British people are saying, this person has come over to a foreign land to fight and possibly die to help us. I don't give a shit if they're black, they're a fucking hero. And there was this insane tension that was caused by this between white British people and white American soldiers. because to a large extent, Britain didn't have these issues of racism. We kind of learnt it during the war from America, though, and I think racism was much more a thing after the war in Britain than it was before. Now, I'm not going to pretend it was a bed of roses, and I'm not going to pretend everything was fine. But real issues with race really started in Britain after the Second World War because of American influence over British culture. Now, what I find really interesting about this is the dynamics that it caused. So there are instances of American army camps asking local British pubs to segregate white and black patrons, and British pubs largely refused. There are very few instances where that actually happened, to the extent that in Preston, I'm trying to remember the name of the area of Preston, Bambers Bridge, some black American soldiers were drinking at extra time, after hours, with some locals, and the American military police came along. So we've got to get back to the base. Bit of a fist fight breaks out, and the MPs go away. Then they come back with guns. Now, this was not long after a race riot in America, I think in Detroit, and news of that was just reaching the UK at the time. So the MPs come back with guns. The black soldiers are like, fuck. And so they go back to base, they get guns, and an actual battle happens on British soil in Preston during World War II between white American MPs and black American GIs. They are the only shots fired in anger in an armed conflict in the mainland during World War II of Great Britain. Was basically a blue on blue, as it were. And one black American GI was killed, a number were injured, and they're all arrested and charged and so forth. After the war, they were absolved, crimes commuted, and in 1948, whichever, I don't think it was Roosevelt, was it? I think it was a successor by 48, wasn't it? Anyway, the American army accepted black soldiers and white soldiers on equal footing, and then the whole civil rights thing happened a bit later. Now, the civil rights thing happened because all of these black American GIs had been in Britain and through Europe and so on, and had experienced equality, sort of, as close to. And they weren't going to go back home and take that shit. And that was the spark, the genesis of the civil rights movement. And like I said before, I like to take from history and use that stuff in games, and it's gotten me thinking that I can't think of a single game, RPG game I've played, where there has been a movement like that. It's not just civil rights. Before then there was the suffragettes. And these movements happen in our society all the time. There's always a movement going on. There's somebody trying to get recognition for their group, their oppressed minority, and there are so many, it's like disabled people, or this new tax in Britain a few years ago, which we dubbed the bedroom tax, and now it's for some people on living in social housing. There's almost no house they can afford because they have to pay tax on a bedroom that they're not officially using, but they can't get a one-bedroom flat. There aren't enough on the market for the number of people the benefit system demands. So there are all these kind of movements, and why aren't we using these in our games? And that was really my thinking, and that's what I'm currently prepping up for my next session. So I should go on to the next question. Ronnie says, I said, and I agree with you about high-level fantasy campaigns. It has to be high stakes with difficult odds and with real problems should they fail. Well, I think that's true of any campaign. That the stakes don't necessarily need to be high per se, but you can run high stakes with low level. I think is where I really want to get to with that. It doesn't really matter what level the characters are. The stakes and the consequences should always add excitement to the story, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I'm going to go with that. Red Baron says, I'm sorry, I have to leave now. I enjoyed the live chat and your work. Goodbye, everyone. Well, I've probably chatted for far too long and missed you going, but if you're still here, it's alright. 3 a.m. Gosh, yes. Morning, Bradley. Civil rights movement I have used in games. I've done games set in that, like, actually I don't think I've done civil rights per se, but I've used movements in games set in those movements, like Call of Cthulhu in particular, I think is what I'm getting to. But I've never taken this idea of a cultural movement and used it in a fantasy game. Because I think in fantasy games you always know the enemy is either monster or power. It's one of those two things. It's either a monster or it's a power. Power being, the powerful, as it were. But this notion of justice or equality or some minority, it's never occurred to me to put it in, and yet it's such a feature of our world, and it builds history. I was just giving you some history, for example, from World War II, of the only battle fought on the mainland being between two disparate groups of Americans. I mean, that you can't make that shit up. That's the kind of thing that can only happen in real life. But we should make that stuff up. We want to escape the rule. It's a fair point. But look, I like to draw inspiration from the real world, and sometimes, especially when I do Call of Cthulhu, I will pick, like, I did a Call of Cthulhu game at Christmas that I was running. It was actually the first time I'd run Call of Cthulhu. But I used the Battle of Cable Street as an inspiration for a game. That was a riot, basically, in London in 1938, 36, I want to say. Probably now 1928 now, is it? I can't remember. Anyway, that fits Call of Cthulhu, but I like to take inspiration, because I think when you use real world as inspiration, I'm not saying take the real world and put it into fantasy. Like, for example, I never run racism based on skin colour in fantasy games, and I never would. I don't currently, but I've had coloured people in my group, and I just think I don't want to drag the shit they deal with every day into their escape. That's wrong. But I will still use the issues of racism and tackle racism by using a substitute, such as a dragonborn or a tiefling or something. Because some things are just too close to the nose, but at the same time, we can look at those issues, and we can look at, racism is an interesting one to me, because it used to be so blatant and so obvious, and now it works in so much subtler ways as to be near invisible, but it's still there. It's still an issue we need to tackle as our society. And you look at any pop culture stuff, films, books, all of it's got a message behind it somewhere, or it's using these real world ideas and just seeing where it can go with them. And it's not necessarily passing a judgment, it's taking these things as the seed, as the genesis of an idea, and seeing what could be done with it. Star Wars is space Nazis, and I love doing Star Wars, and it's not judgmental about space Nazis. It just has space Nazis, and they're the bad guys. So I guess it's actually being a little judgmental. Ronnie says the necessity of any game with civil rights issues be they race or gender or sexuality or religion, is doing it in a mature and sensitive manner. Well, although I use civil rights as an example, and I use it as an example because I find it interesting in regards to what happened in World War II, but just because I like history. But you can do it with any movement, I think. You know, Flat Earth is a movement. It's one I consider quite ridiculous. Nonetheless, it is a movement. You know, you don't have to use politics, you don't have to use race, you don't have to use gender or sexuality, you don't have to use real world issues. I just like this idea of taking movements and putting them within cultures, within cities of D&D. You know, whether it's a justified movement or not, I'd be quite happy to put flat earthers into a D&D city and then clearly have that world being a sphere because the players are going between worlds. And then going to another world that is a disc, you know, where you've got spherical earthers. It's an idea I want to play with more, I think is where I'm going with that one. So when I said, it does provide great drama as long as the players in the game can treat it with the seriousness it needs to be done with. Well, this comes down to tone. Like, the current campaign I'm running, the players want it heroic and epic. But they always know I'll throw some kind of twist, but I would never say, like, you want to do heroic and epic in this campaign. I'm not going to do civil rights movement, because the players wanted heroic and epic. That wouldn't be giving them what they wanted. And, you know, like, Call of Cthulhu works for doing things like that because you've signed up for something gritty. And, you know, if the players have said, we want to do something gritty, let's do Cthulhu, then maybe that's a topic we'd be looking at. But drama comes from conflict. And, you know, sometimes conflict between players can be a good thing if both players know how to roleplay conflict. It can also go terribly wrong. But when you've got a substitute for it, when you've got a completely fantastical thing to do your conflict over, then I think you can do it more reliably between players. Ronnie, when I did a civil rights issue using the Fae to substitute for race as a way of looking at the subject, my players and I dealt with it full on, and they approached it with real seriousness, which helped. Or Globe Earthers on Discord, yeah. I agree that D&D doesn't do gritty very well. I think it can. You don't need a role-playing system. Like Gary Gygax famously said that, you know, we're constantly hoping that the GM realizes they don't need us. And that is definitely true. And because that's true, you can do anything you want with D&D. I just think if you're going to play, if you're going to do gritty, there are better ways to do it than D&D. I wouldn't say it can't do D&D, and I wouldn't even say it doesn't do it very well, because it's more about how the GM tells the story. You can absolutely do grit and drama, and I've done court intrigue with D&D. It just, D&D is a very good combat mechanic system, and it's got lots of spells and lots of rules concerning tactical combat. In the other stuff, it's no different to anything else. You've got some skill rolls. The difference is the skill system is really crude in D&D, which is why I'd say it's not the best system to use, but it doesn't stop you from doing grit at all. It's just a simplified way of handling skills. And really, if you're going to do gritty and non-combat stuff, then you better off, I think, with a skill system that has at least some depth to it, rather than, oh, you've gone up 5 levels, your +1 has increased in 4 or 5 of your skills. So I seem to have got through all of your questions. I possibly scared you all off when talking about civil rights and the genesis of it. Sorry. I just find it, like, it's an interesting story. because mainland Britain didn't get invaded. The only parts of Great Britain to actually get invaded were Jersey and Guernsey, which are islands that are essentially off the French coast, and quite how Britain has them as Crown Protectorates I'll never know. So the mainland didn't get, didn't have a German set foot on it, but we still had a battle. I just find that amazing. And you can still see bullet holes in buildings around parts of Preston, around Bambers Bridge. Which is just astonishing to me. And it's something that I think, like, we don't really appreciate just what a cultural impact having so many Americans in Britain with so much at stake and everything else, just how much of an impact that's had on us culturally as a nation since. Like I say, racism in Britain took the form it did in World War II, and I find that, as somebody interested in history, I find that like really fascinating that this even happened. Sorry. Oh, my YouTube question and answer. Bear with me 1 second. Let me just switch to the other camera a moment while I sort out my authentication to check the thing. One day I'll update this, so it doesn't need to do that. Right, there we go. Okay, it says here you have 6 watching. Oh, hello to the rest of you watching. Please feel free to write a question in the chat. It even appears on screen. Sometimes we get a troll. Luckily, I've got an admin on hand to deal with them. But yeah, feel free to post questions in chat and we'll talk about that stuff. Failing that, if somebody wants to give me another topic, that would be great, because I've already talked about the one I brought to the stream with. I always start these things with 1 or 2 topics. Today I just had the one. But so I'm thinking now about my next session for the Brawlers 2 campaign, and I really want to have a movement of some kind in it. Now the way the campaign has been set, the world that the previous campaign left is now the 10th level of hell. It's stuck in the river Styx, the gas rings around Asmodeus. They've already popped off it once. They popped to... So basically that world had a lot of Egyptian theming to it. There's pyramids and stuff like that. But as it transpired, the gods that became real for the players, and they met them all because I got models for them, were the Norse gods. So I thought this campaign, I've now got models for a load of Egyptian gods, so I've started to use them, and I called them the old gods. So the previously forgotten, but we know the Norse gods kind of abandoned this planet. So what the people have done is they've looked to the old gods. So I'm bringing in Egyptian gods. So maybe that's my movement, and maybe there's this religious conflict. But I'd like something else that's more ridiculous, like another faction that kind of spans the 2 religious ideologies. Something like Flat Earth, but not Flat Earth. Maybe it should be based off of a D&D monster. Like maybe there's some Owlbarian movement or something. So Ronnie says, I was asked by a new GM for tips for running Strahd. My initial reaction to him was to consider running something else first, given that horror is not a good first genre for a new GM. Well, I'm inclined to agree that I wouldn't normally say start with horror. Like it's a lot harder to do Call of Cthulhu than it is to run a generic high fantasy game. That is true. But I haven't read the Curse of Strahd module, but I'm fairly convinced it pretty much handholds you for it, gives you everything you need to run a conventional D&D game. Where the GM might struggle is introducing the horror elements. Now, veterans of horror games, like myself and you, Ronnie, we might think of horror and approach horror slightly differently in the sense that we would be more inclined to do some genuinely shocking, disturbing things, in the way that Jason, for example, he's running a Call of Cthulhu campaign for myself and running at the moment, and the stuff that is happening is really, it's heavily mythos, it's heavily disturbed. You know, we found bodies with brains removed and metal boxes on them. And you know, when you talk about the stuff dry like this, it feels just like, well, that could just be like a D&D monster. And I think that's what Curse of Strahda's got. It's got the elements for you as a book. How to actually take that, there's a body with a metal box and their brains being removed, how to actually make that horror, that's the bit that takes experience. I think, and I don't really know how to convey that, because I don't run horror that much. I think maybe this is something I need to look at and learn and do better with, but I know Jason does it very well. And I think a lot of horror relies on player feedback. I don't think you can do horror well without the players contributing to the horror. Because a lot of the stuff we discover in a horror game in role-playing, you could just as easily discover the same thing in a fantasy setting and it wouldn't be horror. So a lot of it comes from the player's reaction. But the biggest part, and the bit that I don't understand why Curse of Strahd works, and I haven't played Curse of Strahd, but this is the bit I don't get. To do horror properly, I feel personally that you need to have ordinary people. Because the moment you put a hero in, players will kill things. And they're not scared, because they're heroes. They're not meant to be scared. In Dungeons and Dragons, the players are never really scared. They might be concerned they might run out of hit points, but they're not scared. So how do you do horror when the player or the character won't be scared because they're a damned hero? They can kill a vampire when they're high enough level. And that's where I think D&D just... I don't know how you would do horror with D&D, just because of the mindset of the player. Like, you can do horrible things, and I've certainly done horror-esque things with D&D. You know, I've had witches, I've messed with the player's mind, I've moved them into the Feywild and had them meet raccoons and foxes, and then it turns out that's a witch in their dreams doing things to them. Because, you know, purple hags and the way they suck trees. I think it's purple hags which do it. Anyway, or is it the green hags? No, it's the purple hags who do the dream thing. And, you know, I took them through that dream thing. They thought that their characters were there, and it wasn't. I was dealing with the dreams they were having because there was a purple hag on them sucking their mind out. But it's never really horror because they're a damned hero. They're a big damned hero, they've got a big damned sword, and they'll hit that damn witch as soon as they can get out of the dream. And that's the problem with D&D for that kind of thing. You know, you've got to use the right tool for the job. You don't undo a screw with a spanner. But having said that, I think the modules I've seen for 5th edition, the way they're set up, it gives you everything you need, I would imagine, having not read it. Hello Diaz, how you doing? But as you own D&D 5th, what advice would you give about running Strahd? Well, as I say, I've not read Strahd. I think the main thing that I would do, if I was going to do horror in D&D, I would try to keep the players low level and don't give them magic stuff that gives them stats and bonuses. Don't make them feel confident. What I would do, like, if I give them anything magical, it would be a plot MacGuffin. But I don't know what's in that book. I've not read The Curse of Strahd. I don't read the 5th edition modules. I've got dead to them inside. There's just too many. I mean, you can't keep up with that stuff. I'm still reading Xanathar's. It's taking me forever. How to D&D said, it's been interesting heading out, all the best. You know what, I haven't actually revealed the other thing I was going to talk about today. Dia says, I love Strahd. As a setting, it sounds quite interesting. I just, having not experienced it and not played it, I wonder just how horror it really is. I think it's more gothic than horror. That's the impression I get. Ronnie says, the Call of Cthulhu game Jason is running is really good, but a total mindfuck as there are too many vicious elements. I'm loving so many vicious elements. I'm loving it. Yeah, Jason does Cthulhu very well. You know, he used to GM the Cthulhu Masters, so you know he's damn good at what he does. And as far as I could see, he ran some of the better games at the Masters. The best one I ever played in at the Masters, though, was one run by Sean Connors, who just unfriended me on Facebook. Cheeky sod. Right, great character. Who's not sure? Oh, Strahd himself. Great games benefit from a great villain. Yeah. Yeah, I love having a great villain. And you know, the biggest issue I think that generic fantasy has is that the villains are quite often monsters that you can't communicate with, and a great villain is one you can communicate with. The best villain I ever had in a campaign was a Rollmaster campaign, and the NPC that I had to use as the main villain come the end of the campaign, because he'd been popping up in different places, and it was something I did deliberately at first with this character, but he wasn't meant to be a main campaign villain. He was just an agent of some nation on a planet that the players were on, and this was Space Masters, so the players go between planets and stuff. So he wasn't meant to be a big player in the galactic scheme of things, but because of the politics of the world they were on, at one point this guy was against them. At another point, the political situation evolved, and he fought alongside them. And there are other points where he was, just because I'd had this with the character a bit backwards, with them against them, with them against them. So there are other points where he was just doing something in the same place that was irrelevant, but he's a potent figure, and so there's some interaction, and so they're trying to size each other up. I'm quite powerful, you lot are quite powerful, we're both in the same area. It's like, what are they up to? What am I up to? You know, and there's all this kind of stuff going on in the middle. Okay, right, we're not killing each other today. Go the separate. He was a great character, and it must have been just after I'd finished watching Firefly, because I jokingly called him Catherine. You know, like Jane in Firefly. And yeah, I just had to use him in the end as the big campaign villain, because the players had interacted with him so many times, and that's something you can't do with an owlbear or a yeti. So you have to try and recreate the same kind of foreshadowing with environmental effects, which is something I think GMs of fantasy worlds, and D&D in particular, need to be really mindful of. And I've been negligent here myself, but when you've got a big monster in a landscape, that big monster shapes the landscape. You know, you've got a fire dragon, you should have, what do they call it, fire fairies, you know, fire geysers type things in the landscape. You know, the monster shapes the world, the alpha predator, whatever, because you need to foreshadow in different ways. But real good villains are ones you can talk to, which is why dragons and humans make such good villains. And I always say the best villain of all is lawful good, because they believe what they're doing is right, if you're using alignment. Ronnie says, I agree, horror is so much about atmosphere and building that dread and the reaction to it. Yeah, and you need players who like to do real good horror. You need players who know how to play horror. The best, like, you know, I mentioned before, the best Call of Cthulhu game I played at the Masters was run by Sean Connors. The thing that made it so good is it was the final of the Masters. So the Cthulhu Masters is a role-playing tournament. I have twice been in the final, and I did win it one year. I've only entered it twice, so, you know, that's pretty good. But the year I won it was the year Sean was running it, and it was a great game. And the thing that made it so great, I don't think was really the adventure itself, although Sean did a great job of running it. The thing that made it so great was this was a role-playing tournament, and this was the final. Everyone there was really good at playing Cthulhu, were really good at playing in a horror game, and that's what made it. It was an experience. The other one was actually, I would argue, the other final I was in, I'd argue was a more Cthulhu-esque, traditional Cthulhu-esque adventure. And it was actually run by Mike Mason. You know, it was one of the big guys of Cthulhu. You know, it's Sandy Peterson and Mike Mason. You know, they are the giants of Cthulhu. He was the GM, but I didn't enjoy it as much. The guy that won that year really did deserve it. I'll just get that out there now. But it was the dynamic of the group wasn't as good. And part of that, I think, was in the pre-gens didn't meld right. And what made Sean's game so good was we were all in the same boat. We were all, and it didn't matter, you know, you could be. We were all essentially equal in some level. We were all. I still have the thing right. No, I've got rid of it. We were all dangerous psychopaths from a mental prison. Essentially, we were locked up prisoners. We were in prison garb. Whereas, so it gave this level playing field and it put us all in the same boat, and we all had this kind of shared experience, and it worked very well as a dynamic. Whereas the other final I played, good players, but it was kind of spoiled by the pre-gens being this one has. Fundamentally, right, you're in the Wild West. This one's a cowboy. This one's the sheriff. This one's an Indian. This one is a civilian doctor. And what power does a native have in that dynamic? And I think that made the role playing kind of tiered, as it were. It wasn't as good. So the players are really important, but at the same time, you know, don't undervalue. Yeah, basically what I'm saying here, although Mike Mason's a brilliant GM, a great writer of Cthulhu, but without the best scenario, it wasn't as good. So a lot more is Becky for running horror RPGs. Cast your votes here. Well, I'm going to run one, and so basically the group as is that we've been playing with online. The next GM is going to be Phil. After that, I really want to start running one using my homebrew system. Now, I originally talked to you, Lord Morbius, about joining that, and then you went and had a load of real life stuff. So at that point, I'm going to drag you kicking and screaming into that group. If we can work it out with times of week and stuff, and if that works, you are in it. Right? And we can make it a horror. That's totally down for that. Ronnie says, I'd love to see Becky do a horror game. Okay. Think. This is what I'm talking about. Player buy-in is important. The players clearly want horror. I've got to deliver. Lord Mulvey, everyone would love to see Becky's take on horror. As I mentioned, I've done horror elements in D&D, but I've only run Cthulhu once. It was very different. I put a lot of different things into. I've had a lot of ideas over the years about when I do Cthulhu, I want to do this. When I do Cthulhu, I used a Jenga tower. You know, like Cthulhu 7th edition has the luck mechanic. You have X amount of luck, and you can use that to modify your dice results, and then you've used that luck, and it's gone, but you've modified your dice result, right? So I did a Jenga tower instead, and it's like anyone can modify a dice result by 5 by taking a brick out with normal Jenga rules, chuck it on top. When that tower falls over, bad shit happens. So now you've all got this luck pool in the middle of the table, but it gets suspenseful, and there are moments where everyone's around the table watching this brick. Is it going to fall? Extra tension, and it's a little bit meta, but there's genuine fear there from everyone at the table that the thing's going to collapse. You can't do that online now. Maybe, does Tabletop Simulator have a Jenga thing? Would that work? Probably not. Anyway, DS52 says, yeah, but are vampire stories really scary? I don't think so. They're gothic villains. Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier with Curse of Strahd. I can see it being more gothic than horror. And I don't find gothic scary at all. And I think vampires in the post-Twilight world aren't horror at all anymore. And maybe post-Buffy world, actually. They're really not scary now. I think we've become just so oversaturated that it's like zombies. Zombies, when the zombies were first used in film, they were meant to represent, be representative of something in society, of mass consumerism, they're always a metaphor. And now we've become so desensitized to zombies. Zombies have become this thing that is just, oh no, it's just this slow shambling thing that's coming to kill you. And it's like that metaphor is gone. Maybe that's what horror really needs. It's the villain is a metaphor for something. And really it's about you. If you could make Strahd representative of the darker side that we all have, some dark aspect, our lack of charity, for example, like when we walk past a homeless person. If you can encapsulate something, some negative trait in us all, and then bundle that up into a villain that is a metaphor for it, then maybe that's where horror is, because zombie films used to be better when zombies were a metaphor. Ronnie says, yes, the element of any good horror is, oh God, I have no power, no chance, no hope. I think you always have to keep hope. Like, in a horror movie, you kill your heroes off, the party off, your stars, or whatever, one by one, right? And you do that. But they're always trying to survive. They're holding on to survival. And without that glimmer of hope, horror doesn't work. Because when it becomes hopeless, you just throw the towel in. You've given up. You have to have the light at the end of the tunnel. Always has to be there. It's just that you could die before you get there. Or the thing's going to get you before you get out. But maybe you can do it. Maybe, if you do it all right, so I think hope's actually very important in horror. Yes, but are they part of the horror tradition? Otherwise it's just another D&D villain which is dull. So this would be vampires. They are part of the horror tradition. Yeah, they are, but I'm curious now, because zombies were always a metaphor for consumerism and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's not even. I'm not even sure if the original zombies were about consumerism now, to be honest, because it was. Who was the filmmaker who introduced them? Did the first zombie stuff? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Anyway, this question, boo. The big damn hero should realise that his big damn sword is not the answer to a shadowy horror that can't be seen, heard or touched. Tension, suspense and using brains over brawn is key to horror. You should watch out how to GM a horror game. There's a video that somebody did that goes into a lot of thoughts on different things you can use, different elements, because you've got to build suspense, and I think that video covers that very well, and some of the things you need to use in horror. Because you can use blood and gore, but blood and gore isn't in and of itself horror. You need that tension, as Randall says. And yeah, absolutely, horror works best when you don't whack things with a sword, and I think that's the problem with D&D is heroes always feel like they can solve the problem with the sword, and if it's not the sword, it would just be one of the skill tests that they're +7 on. Yeah, we'd like to see you do a horror game, just a one-off to start, then do a horror campaign if you want, depending on how it goes, then do pros and cons video about how it went. I think it'll be a short campaign, is what I'm thinking, because I know what games I'm running. So I've got the real world game, which the players have asked for, heroic and epic and stuff, and I've got the online group, and I'm only doing those two at the moment, because life is too busy for more than 2 gaming groups. So when I'm next GMing that online group I get a chance to run either a short or short to medium-ish campaign, and that's the deal. And then we move on to the next person. The environment is an NPC. Damn straight, the DMG info. Welcome, hello. Yeah, absolutely. I'm guessing that's a reference to the earlier bit about the whole monster should shake the environment. Love the environment character in horror. Something is always popping, clicking, clacking, dripping. Ah, right. No, I'm with you. Right, getting very cold all of a sudden. Yeah. One of the things I sometimes do in horror is we all know I famously rant about perception checks and how, in 5th edition in particular, you should never ask a player to roll perception. The player that's genuinely in the rules, that is for when the player is actively searching. And really you should roll the stealth and check it against the passive. And so this whole notion that GMs still do of, right, roll perception, everybody, is ridiculous, because someone's going to pass, probably most of the party, because it's D&D, you never have a weak perception on everyone. That's madness. It's something I've done before when I've wanted to build suspense, is if you're really alert. In fact, I think I covered this in the How to GM Horror video. If you're really alert, like super alert, then are you getting too much information? Are you getting too much sensory input in a scary situation? So to make the character scared, I'll sometimes ask for a perception check, and if they pass, they actually don't see what's really there. They're letting their mind get carried away with them. So I think the example I used in the How to GM Horror video was I used my skull floor, which I sculpted myself, by the way. So I used my skull floor, and the character passed the perception check, so they thought they saw a movement of one of the skulls on the floor that they were walking over. But I was doing sensory overload of the character, because the character's scared. How the player interprets that, well, they just passed a roll, so it must have moved. And that's where I'm playing around with their perceptions and their expectations of what should happen. So I'm taking away some of their control and some of their agency, and that is a horror aspect to remove that agency from the player. You can't have somebody without agency completely as a role-playing game, etc., etc. But to take some agency away and get them uncertain about what's that add that uncertainty, because if you know something's there, it's no longer scary. But if you're not sure, it's uncertainty that really breeds that fear. I do this in everything, not just horror. I've lost the context, but I'm sure it'll make sense in a moment. Hello Malleus U32, how you doing? Hope you're having a great night. Right, Lord Morbius, the environment should be utilised as a villain, if done right, a powerful villain, though I suppose, like all elements, can be overdone. Yeah, well, define overdone. I know somebody who has, on one particular adventure, did 2 hours, essentially, of intro. Players tried to do things, but they were just given loads more narrative, and every time they had this brief moment, and then the GM would do more description. That was overdone to the extreme. And sometimes And I'll give you an example actually of what I think is overdone. It's from the same campaign, the same person, same adventure. Um, it wasn't the length of the descriptions obviously was an issue, but where I think overdone matters is it's in little details, like one of the players tried to do something with the fireplace, and the GM said, no, the fireplace isn't that type of fireplace. It's got... And my thought there was, does it matter what type of fireplace it is? I know you had this elaborate description, and that's great, set the scene, give us things we can interact with. But the moment a player tried to interact with something, you then defined its description to be something they couldn't do that interaction with. That is going too far. I could have almost handled the first 2 hours of the game being very little player interaction if the interactions had allow your players to... If somebody sees a fireplace in their mind differently to you, it doesn't matter that they're seeing it differently. Let them do their thing. And that for me is when environment is overdone. I could cope with the 2 hours of, I say 2 hours of narrative, it's kind of a little exaggeration. There was player interaction, it's just the GM would just bring it back to more narrative, more description, so not much happened in the first 2 hours. George Romero. Why does that name ring a bell? Is this celeb or other? George Romero did The Night of the Living Dead. I think so. Thank you. I must be quite a way behind on the chat. I do say that certainly post-Twilight vampires have lost their bite. They certainly have become more used within urban fantasy. Yeah, and I think, part of it as well is obviously there used to be this great role-playing game, Vampire the Masquerade, and as time's gone on, obviously the license has become split. You've now got so White Wolf, I don't believe exists anymore, if I'm right. But the license to the Vampire game is now owned by multiple companies. You got Onyx Path and somebody else, can't think who, but they're doing different editions. And so Onyx Path is doing a previous edition. The newer edition, there was all that stuff with the Nazi shout out embedded in some of the dice numbers and things. Oh, it's just such a mess. But yes, just in pop culture generally, I think they have lost their mind. I gotta run home and feed the hounds. Well, be a cat person. Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992 is my idea of a proper vampire, forsaken by God, an outcast of the outer darkness, a devoted hero, feeling betrayed and frustrated. I did watch it, but it's so long ago, I struggle to remember it now. I don't remember it well enough now to really... his sense of entitlement makes him view his actions as just in a twisted way. Well, this is the thing I always like to do with villains. I always like my villains to believe they're doing the right thing. And it's not necessarily like the completely obtuse... like... Sometimes people do, plot lines of, I've got to depopulate because otherwise the world's ruined, that kind of plot line. That sort of, like, I know I'm doing the wrong thing, but it's for the greater good. I don't like to use that. I actually like them to believe their actions are the right thing to do. That's why I think lawful good alignment, as it were, makes such a good villain, because they're so, even if it's just moving the moral compass a little bit, but this is right, and it's really right, absolutely, because you can't have, if you've got a character that knows what they're doing is wrong. To me, it feels like Addams Family. That's just not villainous. Yeah, that's pretty much Strahd. Strahd von Zarovich is very much a takeoff of Stoker's Dracula. Cool. Calvin Junge says, "What's your gender?" interesting question. How is it relevant? Yay, cat people for the win. Damn right. My gender is male, Calvin. What's yours? Says Ronnie. Are you subscribed to PewDiePie? Says S2P. No, I'm not an actual Nazi. So no. And that was the last question on the stream. And it's now 10 o'clock at night, and I really need a drink, and we're starting to get the trolls in, so more caught up in questions. Maybe it's time this stream died a death. And thank you everyone for watching. Not packets, no. That would be too many. But I do smoke, and yes, you can hear it in my voice. I've been talking now for a very long time on this stream, and I do need to go get a drink. So, good night to all of you. Good night, Malleus, and to everyone else. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to switch camera now, so no more chat messages. It's just me saying good night, which means we're going to have some graphics. Thank you all, and it's been which I'm on this camera. Thank you all. It's been great having talking RPGs, and thank you for watching, and thank you also to Patreon supporters of Pair of Geeks. That really keeps us going, because the advertising doesn't. We make nothing. So thank you, and see you around next time. Bye bye.